Capitalism appears to be a very misunderstood concept. Some people say they're capitalists, but they don't really understand why. Some people rage against it and think it's full of greed and evil. And so, in this video, I'm going to explain in detail what capitalism actually is, considering I used to be someone who was against it, and it's not because I actually understood what it was and stood rationally against it, it's just because I didn't know. So now I know better thanks to Ayn Rand and objectivism, and I'm going to break down the 10 points I've identified that are crucial to capitalism. Number one, what I always remember and think of when I think of capitalism is voluntary trade. That is the core element of what capitalism is all about. If any system, socio-economic model you're looking at in any country in the world doesn't have fully voluntary trade, it's not capitalism. It is some mixed amalgamation. So voluntary trade is number one. Number two is private property. Number three is profit and loss. Yes, you must have the loss in there as well, as Milton Friedman, the famous economist, says, which I very much appreciate. Number four, you need consensual contracts. Number five is that capitalism is anti-monopolistic or pro-competition. Competition is good in capitalism. It's very good. Number six, you have the capacity to sue, which could also fit into number seven, with capitalism being about objective law and rights. You can't have proper capitalism without that. Number eight, which is definitely a big surprise to some people who do call themselves capitalists. I would say they're not real capitalists, but you must have anarchy to have proper capitalism, which I'll explain in short detail later on. Number nine is leadership as opposed to rulership. There's a big difference. And number 10 is that capitalism is pro-life, pro-reality, pro-good, and pro-happiness. And so, cracking into it, capitalism, it's a system of human interaction which is governed by agreement and contract. It's very hard, once you actually understand capitalism, to stand against it. Really, you can only stand against capitalism if you're someone who wants to be really lazy and be on welfare and not ever have to work or do anything to support yourself. Then you'd be against capitalism. Or if you were some kind of tyrannical ruler that, again, was just like that socialistic welfare kind of mentality, who wanted to be really lazy and not provide any value to anyone else and just steal from other people. Everyone else, 99% of everyone else in the world, capitalism is exactly what you want. Well, maybe not 99%, unfortunately, otherwise we'd have capitalism today, wouldn't we? In a capitalistic environment, people are free to voluntarily cooperate and trade to achieve better outcomes together than they can alone. It's a system of trade that maximizes everyone's potential via the division of labor. It recognizes that some people are better at management, some people are better at doing physical things with their hands, and dividing the labor appropriately. People can offer or start a business offering goods and services, or work for someone else in exchange for money. There's no force there. The motivation for business owners is profit, and a corollary of profit is loss. So to ensure that a business succeeds, entrepreneurs must play by the rules, that is, of the law and of good business practices. Capitalism is fair and functions upon willful exchange, not force. To reiterate that once again, that's the key element which differentiates capitalism from every other system, is that it does not initiate force. It's a system where everyone wins. Everyone wins in capitalism. There's no winners and losers. If you're looking at a system and you're accidentally misappropriately labeling that system as capitalism because you're seeing some people win and some people lose, it's not capitalism then. That's all that's happening. There's not a problem with capitalism, it's a problem with the system you're looking at, which would be some kind of communistic or mixed economy where it's not real capitalism. It's cronyism, it's got the government interfering with regulations and policies, and another key element, if there's a government, you are guaranteed for certain it is not capitalism. You cannot have capitalism if there is a government. Impossible. I don't care what anyone in the world says, and I'll argue them to the death because this point is incontrovertible. It is incontestable. Instead of doing everything yourself, like farmers would in the past, capitalism and money allows us to specialize and increase the quality of life for everyone. The world has never seen true capitalism, never in the history of humanity. Yet, even so, without true capitalism, we have had tremendous advances and improvements over the centuries, which has increased the quality of our life as a species. The history of humanity has unfortunately been dominated by rulers who have exerted their will and whims on everyone without exception. There's always someone above you, and even if you're at the top, you're still a slave to all the wills of the people below you. This whole game of power is an unfortunate stain of the human species. If an external force such as government is telling you how to run your business and that you owe them fealty in the form of your profits, the system you're living under is not capitalism. In a true capitalistic society, external interference is prohibited. No one has the right to interfere in your private business. There is no public property or services. Everything is private. There are no taxes, coercion, or extortion. You can't have that in capitalism because capitalism is against the initiation of physical force. And what is tax if not the initiation of physical force? No one has the right to tax. All interaction is governed by objective law, and all have equal rights under the law. There are no rulers, only those who lead. Rulers, the difference here between a ruler and a leader is that a ruler is initiating force. Think of a politician or a president or prime minister. They're rulers. They initiate violence against others, whereas a leader might be a CEO of a business. A leader is someone who directs and issues not commands, but directions. And if you don't follow them, you're not going to get punished. With a ruler, if you don't follow these orders, you will be punished. So there's a big difference between rulers and leaders, and the world does not need rulers, it needs leaders. Capitalism can also be called privatization, as there are no public, right? I mean, that whole concept of the public is a misnomer. I detail that in different pages. As there's no public forces owning or controlling property, goods or services. Everything is controlled and owned by private individuals, which is a much better, fairer system. For there to be capitalism, there must be anarchy. This means that there is no ruling class or monopolies. The free market reigns supreme. So anarchy is rule by rules. When I say anarchy, I don't mean total unorganized chaos with no rules and just totally disregarding the reality of human behavior and human society, and just the idea that anarchy is portrayed by the mainstream is some detached barbaric system that maybe never even existed at all in the history of humanity. Maybe it did in some indigenous tribes, but it's more of a make-believe concept that has no real grounding to anything. So whenever people nowadays, for the most part, well, I can't even say the most part, people who are intelligent and want order and peace like I do, whenever we speak about anarchy, that's what we mean, a system of rules, not rulers. So anarchy is objective, everything else is subjective and arbitrary based upon the whims of a ruler. So therefore it has to be subjective, it cannot be objective. So only in anarchy can we have objectivity. Everything and anything else is subjective. And when things go wrong, which they do, of course, all individuals have the capacity and the right to sue and settle disputes in courts of law. That's what happens with anarchy and capitalism. which I'll explain a little bit further. A monopoly can only form when it initiates physical force. And do you know what the biggest monopoly in the world is? Because many people don't, and this is very surprising, but it's government, obviously, when you think about it. A monopoly is only a private corporation or an organization, a group of people who exclude entry into a marketplace via the use of force. The initiation of physical force is prohibited in capitalism. Only retaliatory force is allowed or permitted. By its nature, capitalism is pro-competition and anti-monopolistic. When we investigate governments, we discover they have monopolies on land, lawmaking, money, courts, police, military, education, health, just to name some of the most important. They achieve this by having the largest gang initiating violence to subjugate and terrorize the population, along with lots of propaganda, which they would have been able to do this without the propaganda, that society can somehow not function without a form of an oppressive regime. So with a monopoly, 4 things always happen with a monopoly, and the opposite, 4 things always happen with competition. With a monopoly, prices always increase. Customer service always decreases. The efficiency always goes down, and the quality always goes down because there's no competition. If you're the only one making milk, then you're going to raise the prices. If you're the only one making milk, the customer service is going to go down. There's not going to be enough supply to meet the demand, and the quality will go down because why not? There's no competition. If people are forced to use milk, for example, you could say cars or law or security or military, you have all these different marketplaces that provide goods and services. And if you have a monopoly on any of them, those 4 things always happen. And in capitalism, you don't get any monopolies. You only have, because there's competition, there's no one with a legitimate legal right to prohibit entry into a marketplace with the supposed right to initiate physical violence to stop people from competing. That doesn't exist in capitalism. Capitalism has a free market on everything ruled by reason, objectivity, and consent. To ensure this perfect system, there must be anarchy. Anarchy recognizes the fact it's completely unnecessary and immoral to have unelected rulers inefficiently dominating everyone. You may vote to be dominated, but I don't, and many other people don't as well. The idea of a ruler is archaic and barbaric. Anarchy dispenses with this primitive mysticism and embraces rationality in the form of capitalism, a system without rulers, only rules. Modern anarchy is commonly called voluntarism, which is apt as it only supports voluntary interaction. That's the type of anarchy I'm talking about. If you're thinking some other kind of anarchy, no, I'm not talking about that anarchy. This is the type of anarchy I'm talking about, of no rulers. The idea that anarchy is chaos is an incorrect understanding of modern anarchy, the way that anarchists use that word today, and really what the concept actually is, the objective concept behind that word. The truth is all systems except anarchy are chaos. It's a mind-blowing realization when you fully understand that. Governments are the perfect example of what controlled and organized chaos looks like. If it's not anarchy, it's not cooperation. People think, we have this orderly government system. We've got parliament and judicial system, executive branches of the government. We have police and courts and militaries. Everything is so orderly. We have all this legislation, all these laws that keep things running smoothly. That's not cooperation. It's obedience under duress. What else are taxes except compliance due to fear of punishment? A system which can only exist by spreading terror is a chaotic system. The true definition of anarchy is no rulers, that's it. Anarchy is not capitalism by itself, and capitalism is not anarchy by itself. Anarchy is simply a state of humanity not governed by rulers. That's what anarchy is. It's the blank slate that allows capitalism to exist. Without it, it's like trying to draw a picture without a piece of paper. Impossible. You can't have capitalism without anarchy. Anarchy is that blank piece of paper, no rulers. Now capitalism can come along and be drawn on that piece of paper. But if you don't have anarchy, the piece of paper, you cannot have capitalism. You can only have things that are close or resemble capitalism, a pseudo-capitalism, but you can never fully have, as it's correctly called, laissez-faire capitalism. Hands off, non-interference. Capitalism is pro-life, pro-good, pro-reality, and pro-happiness. That's what capitalism is. And this is because the purpose of life, and thus economics, is to properly survive. And proper survival, very shortly, is the pursuit of rational happiness, which can only be achieved when all your interactions are voluntary. True happiness isn't possible in dystopian, monopolistic, controlled states of chaos. It's not. It's only an ersatz parody of it. True happiness, peace, and order can only be enjoyed when there is capitalism, and the best form of capitalism is utopian realisms. And utopian realism is my civilizations model that I'm working on, which embraces and talks about and integrates anarchy, capitalism, objective morality, objective law, objective rights, different policies and privatization, and puts it into an entire model. So not just a socio-economic system, it's also got philosophy, looking at objectivisms, metaphysics, epistemology, morality. It's this whole civilizations model. I don't even think a concept has actually existed for this before that looks at civilization in such a big picture format, such a high bird's end view, and embraces and starts off at the absolute ground level, which is metaphysics, and then epistemology. So metaphysics is what is there? What actually is there? Am I alive? What is reality? What's objectivity? And then it gets into epistemology. How do we actually know what we know? How can we discern truth from fiction? And so you ultimately come to the realization, well, is it faith? Is it feeling, or is it reason, rationality, logic? And you're like, well, I think I'm going to go that way. That's what's really happening there. And then you have morality, and then you've got social economics on top of that, which is where we're at right now with capitalism and anarchy. And then you've got all the other policies and nuances of how a civilization and humanity needs to interact to be peaceful and orderly and objective, and to ultimately be happy. So I'm working on that civilizations model of utopian realism, and I thought I would start here with capitalism. Stay tuned, and you'll be seeing more of utopian realism very soon.